Hi, it's Peter here. Setting up your camera to your likings is a wise thing to do. In this video, I will help you to set up your new OM-1 camera. This is going to be a long video, so I have timestamps for everything down in the description of this video. So if you want to skip something, just go down to the description and click the link and you will be taken to that part of the video where I talk about that specific stuff. And then there also in the end, there will be a very special thing for you, which might make it a lot faster for you to set everything up for your camera. But I will talk about that at the end of this video after we have gone through. And like I said, it's a long video, so grab something to drink and enjoy, because I'm not only telling about the settings that I have, there's also going to be some explanations why, and that might give you some tips and tricks why I do certain things, and there might be something that you learn, I hope. There are a lot of ways to set up your camera, and this is the way I set up my camera. It might differ a bit from the way you want your camera to be set, but this is a good starting point, and I will give you some points to think about why you should or want to do some settings like I do. But of course, it's always great to hear your settings, and if you have something that you do differently than I will tell you, please let me know in the comments down below. It'd be interesting to hear what are your settings and why, because the settings are so big thing and there are so many different features that we always learn something new when you share us your settings. You don't have to share everything because there's so much, but if you have some really good tips and tricks that you do, please let us know. But let's start the whole thing with looking at the new menu system. As you see and know, if you already have the OM-1, it looks a bit different than the previous versions of the menu system. And I think the new one is a lot more intuitive and more logically placed, or the items are placed more logically so that they are easier to find. For example, we're talking about one certain thing is peaking. It used to be so that the peaking, you turn it on from a different place and then you set up the colors, for example, from a different place. Now they are in the same menu right next to each other, which makes it a lot more intuitive and easier to do. I have the camera right out of the box, so they're all the default settings, and I will walk through how I set my new camera. And then, of course, how I store them in my computer and on my mobile. That's also an important thing, but I will talk about that in the end of the video after I have set up my camera. And then one notion, these settings apply to raw images. If you're shooting JPEG, then some of the things might be a bit different. I try to remember to say those things that might differ when we're talking about JPEG. So this is for raw shooting, and if you're shooting, which I hope you are, using ETTR, these settings apply then. The first thing is, of course, the image quality settings. I set it to raw. If I was using JPEG, I would set it to LSF. Image review, I believe as it is. I do not need to see the image right away. But of course, there are some options that if you want to see your image right after you made it, then set a time here. This is something that I don't do. I can chimp if I want, but I don't want the image to be shown on my EVF right after I've taken it, because there might be a next image waiting for me. And if there is another image blocking that view that I have, I might not see that thing and miss an image. So that's why I have it on 0, so I don't see the image right after I've made it. Then let's go to the next one, which is picture modes and white balance. For picture mode, I choose muted and set the contrast and saturation to -2. And this is because I shoot ETTR. I said that this will give me a better reference image on the LCD and EVF for making the exposure. It won't affect the raw image itself, but it will show me a better reference image on the screens. And that's the reason that I do this. This is part of the ETTR routine that I set up my camera to be optimized for that. But if you're shooting JPEG, I would choose the neutral or normal picture mode. Works totally fine. And of course, for portraits, I might use the portrait, and it depends on what you're shooting. I turn off the keep warm color and use color space Adobe RGB. And this has also got to do with the ETTR settings. If you are using JPEG and want your colors to be a bit warmer, you can leave this on. And if you're not editing your images that much, you can use sRGB. That's the best color profile if you're sharing your images a lot and do not edit them, because when I edit, I want to have the Adobe RGB with all the possible color information in the image, and then I will convert it to sRGB after editing when I share the image. ISO noise reduction. This looks like okay like this. There is one setting that might be something that you might want to take a look at. ISO auto lowest shutter speed. This will set the lowest shutter speed that you will use after it starts increasing the ISO. And this is quite handy if you like to use auto ISO. If you set this, let's say at 1/20th of a second, it won't start raising up the ISO before that. When you reach 1/20th of a second, then it starts to raise up the ISO. And this is really good when you have a really good IBIS. 1/20th of a second is no problem. But of course, if you are shooting or photographing moving subject, then you might want to have something different here so that you will freeze the action, and after that it will start to raise the ISO automatically. I very seldom use auto ISO, so I don't really care what this setting is. But if you do, and sometimes it's actually quite good. If you, let's say that you're shooting a party, for example, you go indoors and outdoors all the time, or there are deep shadows, and then there's some parts that's really sunny, you might want to have auto ISO so that it will lift it up automatically when you're in the darker areas, and when you're in the brighter areas, it will lower it. So you don't have to, do it yourself. It will automatically switch the ISO. It depends how bright it is indoors or outdoors, and that is something that photographers who photograph venues use quite a bit. And then the exposure menu. Nothing really to change here. I'm totally happy with the default settings. Metering. No need to change anything. Metering modes are a bit obsolete when you're using flag colors and ETTR for your exposure. It doesn't really matter how the camera measures the exposure. You will see from the flag colors if some parts are overexposed or underexposed. So, I don't really use that. Of course, sometimes you might want to use spot meter if you want, if you're used to it, of course, but still the exposure will be the same if you use flag colors and have the brightest part of the image so that the red is just disappeared. Then it doesn't really matter what metering mode you use. So I leave it as it is. And I will talk about the flag colors a bit later in this video. Then there is the menu for flash. I don't change anything here because I don't really use flash. But if you're using flash, you might want to adjust the slowest shutter speed setting. 1/60th of a second is quite short if you want to use fill-in flash. So if you're photographing somewhere where you want to have the ambient light, and then you will use a fill-in flash, and you might have a longer shutter speed than 1/60th of a second, you might want to get this longer so you can really use fill-in flash, because flash is a very good way of freezing the action. Like a dance floor, it's a bit dark, and then you use a flash, everything freezes, and you still have the ambient light visible. If you have really high shutter speeds, then everything is lit by the flash and the image might not look that good. And then the drive mode. I leave it as it is because I very seldom need to use really high sequential speed. It's nice to have just in case. Sometimes I use it, just for fun, going out shooting birds or photographing rather, to have it 120 frames per second, which is mind-blowing fast speed for 20 megapixel raw images. But there is the frame count limiter that you can set to something that it will limit so that it won't, fill your memory card in an instant. And then the image stabilizer. All these settings are okay like this. If I like to do panning, then I might want to choose this to ES2 or ES3. It depends, but the auto works quite well. And if you use a tripod and want to have the exact crop for images, you might composite them, or you might make a time lapse, then turn this off because it varies the crop if you have the IBIS on, because it might change the position of the sensor slightly and the images might not align perfectly. So in those cases that you need, consecutive images to align perfectly on top of each other, turn the IBIS off. That's probably the only time you need to turn it off. All other occasions, just leave it on. And then we look at the shooting menu too. These settings are only adjusted when I use these particular features. Otherwise, there's nothing to change. Here you see that Live ND is grayed out. When you press OK, it will tell you why. And this is a great new feature because it used to be so that something was grayed out, but you have no idea what did I do? Why is it grayed out? What I have on? This will tell you the reason why it's grayed out. For this particular reason LiveND is grayed out because it needs to have the shutter priority or manual, because it's all about the shutter speed. You cannot use it in aperture priority mode, for example, and it will tell you that you have the wrong mode. This is a big thing because number one question for me on different social media platforms and email is that why does not this and this work on my camera? And it's grayed out and it's almost impossible to tell someone why not, because you need to look at the camera, but this will help a lot. And I think this is a really, really good improvement when it comes to usability of this new OM-1 camera. And other shooting functions. This is also a menu where you need to go only if you need that particular feature. And here is also the fisheye compensation. So if you have the 8mm f1.8 fisheye from Mzuiko, this is where you can set it so that it will make more a rectilinear looking image rather than a fisheye. And here you can set that up. And then the bracketing menu. These are also features that I will turn on if I need to use them. And I do have a video about these functions, so if you want to watch that, you can watch it from there. There's a lot of information about bracketing. Then we have the AF menu, which is tons of information and tons of different features. It is really hard to say which one or which setting is best for you. So what I will tell you is just ideas where to use them, how do they work. Because I really don't need to set anything here that will affect my shooting that much or photography. I will have it as it is, but let's dive into a few things that might help you. Let's start with the first menu. Like I said, everything is default, just fine for me. There are a few things that I did. And I have set the AF on button working in MF mode. I use MF quite a bit. Now that the AF on has dedicated button and placed a bit differently, I can use it to fine-tune my manual focus. First I manual focus, then I press the AF on button and it will finish the focus. So it will help to do manual focus. And if you don't have the manual focus clutch, MF clutch, then this is one way to do it. Set the camera to manual focus and then use manual focus and press the AF on button to finalize the image and fine tune it if needed. It's quite work. It is a bit new workflow when it comes to using the camera for me. It was also available in EM1 Mark III, but the button was placed a bit differently. This is a better place, at least for me, so it's easier to use and it is a dedicated button for that. And that is something that I will practice and see if that's something that works for me. If it doesn't work, then I will switch it back and use it for something else. And this is also something that you should consider, is to try different things and try different settings and see what works for you. And then you can store them, which I will talk later in this video, how to save your settings. But this is something that you should always try. Try to, differ your settings or buttons and see which one works. And when you have them stored, you can always come back to the old settings that are proven good. But if you find something new that will help your photography, then you might, start using your camera a bit differently. And that's the beauty of the customizability on the cameras. It's, you can do so many different, or you can set it up with so many different ways and for different genres and all that. But let's continue. From Starry Sky AF, I will set the settings to accuracy. I think that's a better way. I don't think the speed is something that I need when I'm aiming my camera towards the sky. And then the second page in AF. I like basically how the settings are. Like I said, I don't really tweak the AF that much. For my type of photography, it's fine like it is out of the box. But there's one button that I might change to use, and that's the AF on button again. This can be set so that when I press the shutter button, when I have the face priority on, the shutter button focus won't concentrate on the faces. Then if I want to pick a face, then I press the AF on and it will start focusing on a face. And that's a very good if there is a lot of people in the streets and I want to photograph a building, for example, and I wanted to photograph the building and want to focus on the building so that the face priority won't interfere. But if I want to focus the faces of people, then I press the AF on button and it will start tracking or focusing to the face. And then the third page in AF. CAF sensitivity is something you need to test. For me, the default settings are just fine. It depends on the movement of your subject. Use positive numbers if your subject enters the frame quickly, the camera reacts a bit faster. So if there is let's say that there is a bird that flies into the scene. When you have a +2 or positive number here, it will be quicker finding the bird. But if you are following a bird, let's say that it's sitting on a tree and you start following when it starts to fly, then have a negative number. So if you have the focusing points, right, let's say in the middle, and you miss a bit, you move your camera too fast, it might, if you have it fast, it will grab the background. But if you have it slow, it won't immediately focus to the background. It will stay longer on the bird. So you have more, let's say, tolerance on the camera movements. For me, for example, that's a better way of setting the camera because I'm not that good in following flying birds. So if the AF is a bit slower on that type of photography, then it might give you better results. But that is something that you have to test for yourself because it's hard for me to say which one works best for you. But now that you know how it works, give it a try and test different settings and see what gives you the best results. And then there's the AF limiter, which is a handy tool. I talked about it in this street photography video that I sometimes use it to make the focus so that it's only for around 4 meters so that I can use the so-called hyperfocal thing that I will have 2 meters all the way to infinity, everything sharp. But let's say like bird photography, you know that there is a bird that's flying, 50 meters away and they, it's some kind of a road for the birds that they always fly. You can set it to, let's say, 40 to 60 meters. So it won't never focus on the background. It will always stay on that limit. And you have several different settings that you can store here. And I think this is a brilliant, brilliant way of making sure that the camera will focus to the area where you want it to focus. Then we have a page for movie AF, and I will talk about video settings in another video. This is mainly for photography. And AF targeting and operations. Here you can, for example, make a custom size AF area. Very handy for many occasions. Turn AF targeting pad on if you want to use the touch screen to move the AF point while using EVF. It's a good feature, but it's a bit hard when the EVF is right in the middle of the camera. Your nose is on the way, so that it's really hard to use the touchpad for focusing. It works better on a camera like Pen F, where the EVF is on the side, so you have more room on the side to use your thumb as positioning the AF point. But it is a good way of doing, and if you can do it with the camera that has the EVF in the middle, by all means, it's not a bad feature at all. But I'm not really used to doing that, so I don't use it. This page is for MF settings. And the ones that I use from here are peaking and magnify. And like I said, now you can set the peaking colors from the same place where you have the actual peaking on, which is a lot better way than going through different menus and trying to remember where it was. Magnify and peaking is a really good way if you are doing a lot of manual focus. These are really crucial help. Even though, like many have said, that the new EVF on the OM-1 makes it so much easier to use manual focus without peaking. And that's true. It's a lot easier because it's so much sharper than the EM1 Mark III has. Then there's a dedicated set of menus for video. I will talk about these in another video. Well, we have covered quite a bit already, but now we go to the custom menus. The first one is operation. Here you can set the button functions, and these are also quite personal. There are some pretty good settings already on the default settings, but here you can change and tweak this. What I've done is I've set the ISO button, which I don't really use for that, to set it for peaking. And then when I use manual lenses, I can press the ISO button and it will show me the peaking colors. And then when I press it again, they will go away. This helps me a lot when I use manual focus lenses. That's what I've done. As you see, there are lots and lots of different options. And what's good about now is that you can set some of the special computational features under these buttons. For example, the rec button is defaulted for handheld high-res shot, which is a really handy way. It's a lot easier and faster way to use it from a single button than go to the menu and set it up. I think this is a good addition or good improvement in the usability of this new OM-1 camera. And then the dials. There are two dials, front dial and the back dial. Well, I've set it so that on aperture priority and shutter priority, the back wheel or the back dial is for exposure compensation, and the front wheel is in aperture priority is for the aperture, and of course in the shutter priority is for the shutter. So this is the way I do it, because the main thing is that the camera usually gives you an average exposure, and then it needs to be tweaked. It depends on the scene. And with the back wheel or the back dial, I can change the exposure to plus and minus. And when I use the flag colors, I adjust it so that the red color is just turned off, and then my exposure is perfect. Or I could leave it, some other parts there could be red, because the image that I'm seeing from the back screen or the LCD is a JPEG, and RAW has a bit more room for exposure. So I might leave some parts of the red on the image, but not too much, and then I can tweak it in post. And remember, this is only for RAW. If you're using JPEG, don't do this, because it will ruin your JPEGs. And then the F and lever button on the back. I used to have it as a power button, but for some reason I haven't used it for a long time. I used the regular power button. And sometimes what I do with the lever button is that I assign it to video. If there is a venue where I need to shoot stills and videos, then using this is very handy. I just, position 1 is for stills, and then position 2 is for video. And that's very handy if you need to do both at the same time. Then we have operations. I have left these like they are. And then number 3, LiveView, no changes. There's one interesting feature called night vision, and that is something that helps you to see if it's really dark. You turn it on from here, but there is a better way. You can assign it to a button and then turn it off from there, and then you can turn it off if you don't need it. And I think that's the better way than diving into the menus. And number 4, information. This is really important if you use flag colors. On one of these, you need to have shadow highlight on in order for the flag colors to show. And the same applies here. This is crucial. And if you don't see them, then press info button to toggle between the different set of information on the screen. So if you toggle the info button, the information on your screen will change the way that you have set them in here. At least in one of them have the shadow highlight on both of these. And grid and other displays. Let's first look at the histogram settings. This is also something to do with the exposed to the right. I have set it to 254 and 1. This way, if the luminance value on the scene is more than 254, I will see red here, which means that it's overexposed. And if it's under 1, which means it's underexposed, then it's blue. And when I make the exposure, if I see some red, I will adjust so that there is minimal amount of red. And I also know which part of the image is overexposed. If it's on a face, then definitely you don't want to see anything red on the foreground here. That's not a foreground, forehead here. And that's the way to make the best possible exposure on an Olympus camera or OM system camera. But of course, the image will be quite bright, and then you need to lower the exposure and sometimes the highlights in post. But you will get a lot more information, and the image quality will be better, because when you're lowering the exposure, the noise also that might be in the image or in the file will be less visible. And that's something that most of us want. And then you have the ability to put some grids on the EVF and LCD. This might help you to make the composition, because there are different options how the grid is displayed on the screen. And you can also change the color. So if you're photographing really bright scenes, you might want to have black grids. And if you're photographing in really dark, you might want to have white grids. These are something that you might not need, but they are something that might help you to make a better composition when you have some line. Then the card/folder/file menu. I edit the file name so that I have different file name for different cameras. This is something that I've always had. You know, there are different serial numbers on different cameras, but for some reason I like to see which camera was used when I made an image, and I can see it from the file name, and I think it's quite convenient for me. But this is not necessary. And you can set the name for sRGB and Adobe RGB differently. Information record. Here I add the info for manual lenses. I can write down the lens here, and then what it does, it will write the lens name on the metadata, so I know which lens was used. Otherwise, it won't tell, because there is no electronic connection. The camera doesn't even know that it has a lens on. When you write the EXIF, it knows. And you need not to do this if all your lenses are electronic lenses. For example, if all your lenses are M-Zuiko lenses, forget this, you don't need this at all. Copyright info can be written here. You can put the copyright owner and the artist's name. And in most cases, it's the same. But of course, if you have a company that has the copyright of your images, then you write that down there. I do this for two reasons. The first reason is, of course, that I already have it there. When I import the images, the copyright info is there. It's baked into the metadata. And the second thing is the case if I lose my camera, and if someone who knows about this finds it, can find whose camera it is, there's my name. And, there are not too many Peter Forsgards in the world, so I'm easy to find that way. It's just a long shot if that ever happens. I don't know if that's anything, but it's something anyways. And then page 3, monitor sound and connections. This is something that I always do. I turn the beeping sound off. I have no clue why this is always on by default. It should be off, in my opinion, because who needs that sound? Tell me if you do. Tell me why there is the sound. If you know or use it, please let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear. And then there's the eye sensor setting, so that when you lift your camera up, the EVF will turn on and the LCD will go off, and then the vice versa. If you take your camera off the eye, the EVF will turn off and the LCD will turn on. I have this off. I want to use this button here to turn it off. I don't know. I'm just used to it. It's a bit annoying when that changes all the time. And the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth settings, I don't touch. I find like this. And then battery and sleep. I will turn the sleep time to 5 minutes. And if I'm using or doing street photography, I will have this off, so my camera will be on all the time. It's a lot faster to react to certain things if I need to react quickly. And then we have My Menu, which is really good. You can store here your most used menu items. The way it goes, you go to the menu item, press the record button. This will open up and you can choose on which page of My Menus you can set this menu item. You have 5 pages and 7 items on each page, so 35 altogether, which is quite a lot. What I've done is that I've set so that certain AF things are in menu 1 and video type stuff is menu 2, and then, kind of like categorize them so that it's easy to find. Okay, now that we have set up the camera the way we want, we need to store these. Then you have to go back to the shooting menu 1 and use the custom modes. And then what I would do is to set the basic settings, what I use all the time, which are the things that I like to change in the camera for general shooting. I would put it on C1. And then reserve C2, C3, and C4 for special occasions. Like if I go out and do some bird photography, I might set certain settings for C2 and certain settings for C4 and C3. It depends. Maybe single autofocus on C2 and then continuous tracking and pro capture for C3 and, stuff like that. But that is something that you have to figure out yourself, and that depends on what you are shooting. And after this, there is one more step. Store all your settings to your computer or mobile. Just attach the camera to your computer with the USB that came with it. Open OM workspace, choose camera and camera settings and save them. Then you have them on your computer. So if something happens and you mess up the settings, it's easy to just load them from your computer and you have all the settings that you have stored there. You can also store these settings to your mobile phone. Use the OI.Share app, connect the camera to the phone, choose settings, choose camera management, camera settings, save settings from camera, and it will set your settings from your camera. And there is one good thing. You can also store only the custom modes or one of them. What you can do is to have several settings for these, and then you can name them, and when you're out there shooting, you can upload them from your phone. This is a really handy way. It actually extends the amount of custom settings. And I don't know how many you can store. I never checked that, but that's a very good way of kind of expanding the custom modes on your camera. And now the special stuff that will make it easier for you to set up your camera. I have set a web store where you can buy the settings that I've just told you. It will be stored only on C1 and it will be ETTR settings for raw imaging. All the instructions can be found in a link in the description of this video, and that will support my channel if you decide to buy these settings. These settings that I've said most of them are my own personal settings. You might have different settings, and like I said in the beginning of this video, please tell me in the comments down below what are your best settings for your things. Just the basic one, you don't have to tell them everything, but of course you want to share them all, by all means do it. It's always good to learn and see how others set their cameras, because I might learn something and the viewers might learn something new about your settings. And here are some more videos about best settings for different Olympus cameras. You might want to watch that playlist or pick the video that is about your camera. But I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope this helps you. And thanks for watching. Bye for now.